We can reflect back and see our mistakes, but rarely can we change what has come to be. The Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society presents the Ojibway at Fort William. Historical interpretation is laden with bias, and because of this we often fail to see the obvious. A conquered nation with no written language is no match for the pens of imperialists.
Once a man was warned by his guardian spirit in a dream never to travel at night, or a creature would take him away forever. From this day on, the man was very careful, and every day he came home before Geesis. The day sun went from the sky. But one time the trapping was so good that he killed a great number of beaver and did not notice the geezes had gone to his resting place for the night. When he realized that it was dark, he grabbed one of the beaver and started running home. Traveling across the lake to his camp, he heard something in the dark sky above him. Looking up, he saw a great bird swooping down on him. He tried to escape, but the nightbird clutched him and carried the poor man off. The man was never seen again by our people.
The north shore of Lake Superior is home to the Ojibway, a branch of the Algonquian people, and from this land came the entirety of their existence. They were an industrious people who had mastered the survival skills necessary for the harsh climate in which they lived. Each person's role was essential. Men hunted, women ran the homes, and both shared in the maintenance tasks. The Ojibway lived as part of the natural balance of nature. Migration was dictated by seasonal changes. Moving by foot, dog sled, or canoe meant the accumulation of material possessions was limited to necessities. Late fall was the time summer bands dispersed, and small family units moved to their individual winter hunting grounds, leaving behind food stored in pits and skeletons of their summer homes. The encampment was run entirely by the women. Winter dwellings that they built consisted of conical sapling frames covered in birch bark and insulated with moss. The Ojibway women gathered the firewood, prepared the meals, cleaned hides, and made clothing, footwear, and blankets. Snowshoe and tool building, as well as canoe repair, fell to whoever had time. Women also had a hand in hunting, and tended the fish nets and trap lines while the men were away hunting big game. A man had to spend many days at a time alone in the forest, tracking and hunting in order for the family to eat. A large animal meant feasting, and an assurance of meat for some time, but often times were not good. Game was scarce, and people went hungry. Spring brought with it a new array of tasks. The families packed up and began to migrate back to the summer grounds, stopping along the way to collect sap to make syrup and sugar. Also at this time of year, the birch bark could be peeled off the trees without damage to the middle layer or the wood inside. Canoes were built and repaired, for soon the ice would be off the lake. Once back at the summer encampment, the Ojibway covered wigwam frames and began to tend to matters of survival. Summer was the time for planting gardens, and as well as domestic plants, there were wild plants to eat. From the forest, the Ojibway harvested berries and roots. Some were eaten, some were stored. The Ojibway did little hunting during this season, as summer pelts of the fur-bearing animals were not good. Tracking was difficult, and some animals had young. Summer was a more leisurely time of year, and the Ojibway were a physically fit people. Both men and women competed in lacrosse games, foot races, and other sports. the men tested their hunting skills in shooting matches. Autumn brought the rice harvest. Wild rice was part of the marsh vegetation, so it was harvested from canoes. The families set up camps along the shore during this time and collected other edible vegetation. Back at the summer camp, the gardens were harvested. Some food had to be stored for the cruel winter. It is not surprising that a people at the mercy of their environment would be deeply religious. The Ojibway not only believed in gods, but they believed that every existing thing in the universe had a spirit. Events were blamed on or attributed to the moods and whims of these spirits, and daily life was full of rituals meant to deal with them.
It is known to our people that Pineishi, the thunderbird, causes the rain to fall from the sky. If an Indian takes a pointed object and places it upward to the sky, rain will not fall. A man can use a spear, pointed stick, or axe, anything that is sharp, to prevent the rain from coming. This works because the thunderbird is afraid of sharp objects.
Closely tied to the Ojibway religion was the Medowin Society, a select group who made a thorough study of the medicinal properties of plants, roots, and berries. This knowledge, combined with strong religious beliefs, was the tool used to cure the sick and injured. The Ojibway way of life was in harmony with the land. The people knew how to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves while remaining a part of the balance of nature. Like every other aspect of this natural environment, the balance was a delicate one that could be easily and irrevocably damaged. European explorers, in search of trade routes to the east, landed on the shores of North America. They called the natives Indians because they thought they had reached India, but the Europeans found no spices and no silk. What they did find were furs that back in Europe were made into clothes and hats and sold for a high price. It was all very simple. The Europeans formed companies, settled in the new land, and offered wondrous trade items to the natives in exchange for pelts. By the year 1796, the fur trade, based on beaver pelts and European vanity, was well underway. Two major rival companies had been established, the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company, and relations with the natives had been secured. The Northwest Company needed to move its headquarters north of the newly established United States and British North America border in order to avoid paying duty on shipped goods. A location central to the already existing east and west trade routes was necessary. After 2 years of exploration, the mouth of the Kaministiquia River was chosen, and on this site was built a fur trade post that was the pride of the Northwest Company. They called it Fort William. Records show that there was a written agreement between the natives and the Europeans to allow the Northwest Company to build the fort in this area. Years before, French traders had made contact and traded with the Ojibway, so not surprisingly, the natives were reasonable about trading with these Europeans. The Northwest Company had trade goods to offer that must have seemed remarkable to a people that handmade everything they needed. The natives were saved time and trouble. They received muskets and steel traps for hunting, and their diet was changed to include new staples: tea, flour, and sugar. Hides, which had taken hours of preparation, were replaced with manufactured European cloth and blankets. These people became accustomed to European metals in the form of pots, kettles, utensils, and jewelry. The Ojibway soon came to rely on the European conveniences, and their relationship with the land began to change. The Northwest Company was, in turn, dependent on the Ojibway. Being a people of the land, the natives knew how to survive even under the most adverse conditions. They knew the territory and how to travel in it, and they knew how to track and hunt. To the white men, the natives were craftsmen who provided canoes, snowshoes, moccasins, and many other essentials. They were guides, and they were providers. Above all else, the natives were the Northwest Company's source of income, because it was the natives who trapped the beaver and brought in the pelts. Activity at the fort fluctuated with the seasons. Winter was the quiet time, because the hunters were out in the wilderness trapping and accumulating beaver pelts. The fort was manned by only a few Northwest Company and Ojibway people. During the summer, Fort William flourished. Pelts were brought in, sorted and stored, and trade goods were given in exchange for them. Alcohol played a significant role in the lives of both the Northwest Company men and the Ojibway. Its consumption was a ritual part of most business transactions, and liquor was used frequently as a trade and gift item by the Europeans. The detrimental effects of the introduction of alcohol into the Ojibway lifestyle would be felt for years to come. The most significant social interaction between the Northwest Company and the Ojibway at Fort William was the marrying of company men to native women. Sometimes this was done for love, and sometimes to form trading alliances. The political marriages assured the company their furs and the natives fair trade deals. As well, the women's social status was heightened and her life was much easier. Upon retiring, many company men settled with their Ojibway wives among her people, or on settlements set up by the company. But unfortunately, many Northwest Company men showed no respect for their marriages to the native women, and returned to their European wives, leaving women and children deserted. This cruel treatment was accepted by the Northwest Company, with the only consolation to these families being the provisions the fort dished out at the ex-husband's expense. Children of these marriages were readily accepted by the Ojibway as their own people. Some male offspring were sent by their white fathers overseas for a European education. The mixed-breed girls who were raised in the fort became the choice of the fort men for wives. Soon, marriages between native women and white men were frowned upon by both sides. In 1821, the Northwest Company was amalgamated into the Hudson's Bay Company, and the voyageurs, the company's middlemen, had to travel to Hudson's Bay. Fort William was no longer the flourishing center of the fur trade. In time, activity at the fort dwindled down to nothing. The people who had been dependent on the fort, the Ojibway, were left to struggle. Some returned to the forest and the old way of life, and some were pushed onto reservations. The role of the Ojibway at Fort William had been a crucial one. It was a fact that the fur trade and consequently the Northwest Company could not have existed or survived without them. The natives provided the much-needed beaver pelts, craft skills, and manpower. The Europeans did not know how to survive under primitive conditions in a harsh boreal climate, and for the most part were not expert hunters or trappers. Yet the Ojibway had no written language, so history was not recorded from their point of view. By the mid-1800s, the Ojibway, once a great nation and a people of the land, had lost much of their traditional culture and were quickly becoming an oppressed minority in their own lands. The fur trade had dramatically altered their way of life. They were now dependent on many European items. Their religion had been pushed aside by Christianity, and European disease and alcohol had decimated their populations. There were years of struggle over the making and breaking of treaties with the white man. How interesting it would be to have a written historical account of the fur trade from the Ojibway. Today, there might be a very different interpretation of the role that they played, and one might not so easily justify or ignore the effects on their culture and way of life.
Gichimanito was proud of his people who had shown themselves brave and steadfast. His smile broke forth like bright sunshine after a storm. It sparkled on the waters and danced on the leaves of the trees, dappling the ground beneath them. All the world was warmed by it.
Today, many Ojibway people are taking a strong stand and fighting politically to improve conditions for their people. They cannot change what has happened, but they can determine their future.